What's one advice you give for your 20-year-old self?
Don't try to fit into something or don't try to fit something that exists, but think about what you enjoy and think about if there are ways to combine the things that you enjoy.
Yeah, so my first question is, how to get into Pony AI? What's the journey of your career?
Yeah, so I've been working on autonomous vehicle. I think it's 15 years now. Started shortly after the DARPA Urban Challenge in a team in Germany. And then basically all of my research career worked on autonomous vehicles and the topics of safety and systems engineering until in 2017, it brought me to Silicon Valley and a research project with Stanford and my university in Germany. And after that research project, I interviewed with a couple of companies here in Silicon Valley and decided to join Zook for about 3.5 years, kind of seeing what it takes to build a vehicle from scratch, make it autonomous. And after like 3.5 years, I kind of thought I also want to get a different perspective and joined Didi Autonomous Driving here in Mountain View to see what can you do with a really large fleet of vehicles. And then Didi was very interesting, but for several reasons focused more on the Chinese market, whereas I was really curious about not only working on the technology, but also having vehicles on the road and experiencing that technology. So I joined Pony about 2 years ago, the lead for systems and safety engineering, and in the meantime also doing a lot of product development and business development.
Okay, I see. So how do you think your role changes from a system engineer, which is more technical, to right now the lead of a department?
Wow, that's an interesting, interesting path that I didn't think about before taking on the role as a systems engineer, but it definitely has to do a lot more with cross-functional work. Like when you start as a systems engineer, right, you usually work on one topic and you really become a specialist in that topic. But over time, your scope grows on the engineering side. And you have more touch points within your company, with suppliers, with customers, and so on. And so I think that the role complexity for me at least, grew continuously. Basically every year there was a larger system or a more complex problem to solve. And with that complexity, it shifted from doing individual contributions on the engineering side to leading teams and guiding people into systems engineering. No matter if they were directly systems engineers or from other teams, I don't know, from perception team or planning team. And I think it requires much more human skills, I think, at this point than in the beginning. And unfortunately, the engineering part is much, much smaller in my role.
Talking about safety, do you have any metrics or KPIs to know what is safe enough for autonomous driving?
Well, safe enough is an interesting question, and people have written books about the topic, like how safe is safe enough. I think Goodman is one of the most famous examples there. It's really an interesting problem. I personally believe, and that's really my personal opinion, is that if technology can bring a benefit into any domain, we should figure out what opportunities it has and what the upside is. So basically what the safety impact can be. But we also need to look very closely into the new risks that are introduced by this technology. Now, for autonomous driving, I think the best way to measure safety is how many collisions are caused by either a human or an autonomous vehicle in traffic. And how many of the human-caused collisions would the technology actually not prevent, right? But also, how many additional new collisions would the technology cause? And really understanding that part is important to me. It's not only about preventing the collisions that humans do, but autonomous vehicles will have problems and they will fail and they will cause collisions that may not have happened before. And so it's at that point, it becomes a trade-off. It's hard to measure, but I believe that metrics like, for example, the collision property per mile while operating is an interesting one. Or if you flip that, how many miles between collisions do you drive? How many miles between causing injuries? How many miles between causing maybe even major injuries or life-threatening injuries? We cannot accept that we know of failures that can happen in the field and we just ignore them. So besides the statistics, there's also a notion that's really hard to measure, where you basically say, I know that this fault can happen, and if this fault happens in the wrong situation, I need to have some sort of like backup in place so that it doesn't cause any collisions. So there's the statistical part where I think taking the human as a reference and then adding a factor to it to be safer than the human is one part, and the other part is really, okay, I know that a certain type of collision can happen, so I need to have something in my system that at least prevents that a single point of failure can cause that collision.
I see.
But that's hard to measure, to be honest, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's more like a systems engineering problem, actually, where you think about what can go wrong, and then you figure out how to detect and mitigate them.
Right. And I think even the government, they don't have like a clear regulation on what safety is called good enough in autonomous driving. And yeah, I think that's a really, that could be like a huge topic discuss about like safety on autonomous vehicles.
It definitely is. Inside of companies, it is a huge topic, and I think we just have to accept that there is an inherent risk when you participate in traffic, right? You cannot say there's zero risk. That just doesn't exist. So something our societies have accepted forever, or at least tolerated, maybe not accepted, but tolerated. And I believe that's a good way to think about introducing the new technology, that there will always be something that goes wrong. We just need to make sure it's reasonably low that it actually happens.
I see. How is the relationship and how do you communicate with the government on safety?
Yeah, I have a little bit of experience in the European side, the Chinese side, and the American side. And I have to say it's different in all different regions, right? Because the legal systems are slightly different. The history of technologies and how they are introduced is different. The market needs are different. And so it's quite interesting. If I would have to summarize like the main things, then I usually think you should communicate very openly and transparent with the government, because the governments need to support you in a way that they don't block you, right? So working with the governments and being transparent, and of course meeting all the regulations that are in place, but also work with them on new regulations that come up is an important part of every AV's company's work, right? There are so many groups around the world, like the UNECE, there's the ISO, there's SAE in the US, and there are many others that are working on standardization, on defining like the minimum safety requirements and these kind of things. And it only works if regulators and companies who want to provide this technology can work together there. So transparency and collaboration, I think, are the key things to work with regulators.
I see, transparency. How about, do you see any country particularly are more open, or any countries are more like risk averse? Because I heard like the European Union is usually cares more about the risk. Is that true?
I think every society and the people in the societies care about risk more or less the same. Really the legal frameworks that are in place that kind of have a different way how regulations evolve. So for example, in Europe, typically, you want to have a regulation first before you bring a technology into the market. And especially for autonomous vehicles, this has been the case for quite some time. Whereas in the US, with a federal system and each state having the authority of like basically deciding what can be on the roads or not, there's a lot of like heterogeneity and diversity in the regulations, where if you're a company and you want to bring this technology to the market, usually there are states that don't block you at all, and you don't have to meet a certain technical level. They basically say that if you bring it to the market, then you have to make sure it's safe, because if something happens, kind of like retrospectively, you will be liable for that. And that's a different approach, because you basically have no barrier in the beginning that you have to pass. And then there's for example, China is somewhere in the middle, right, where the government is really interested in bringing this technology into the field. The public is very open to this technology, and so the government is working together with the companies, kind of like iterating even on the regulations, starting small, like allowing small tests, allowing small fleets. But if you want to grow, you work with your regulator to basically increase the fleet size, increase the area in which you can operate. And then at some point, you may be able to have no driver in the vehicle anymore, which a lot of companies already do. So it's very different in these three markets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you have any good sources? Like I heard you mention like there's books about like safety on autonomous driving. Any good sources you recommend? Like learning more about it?
I think you can learn a lot by just using large language models and asking good questions at the moment.
Okay.
So we do this quite a lot actually in our daily work, because we have seen that if you phrase your questions correctly and are very specific, you get pretty good answers. That's of course one thing you could do. Another thing is there are certain people who have a lot of experience and are speaking really up for the technology. Phil Koopman is one of those persons. He has great lecture series about the topics available on YouTube, and he has published books in the topic. The other part is there's quite a lot of research projects that happened over the last 10, 15, maybe 20 years, all the way until today in the European Union especially. And all these results are public knowledge. So if you look at research projects with the topic of autonomous driving, there's the Pegasus family, there's the CCAM, I don't exactly recall what the acronym is, but the series of projects, like these things give you a lot of insights into the technology, into and basically not only like the technical aspects, but also human machine interaction, regulatory aspects. Not so much on the business side. I think that's still the big unknown. I would say to the public, like how do these business models actually work?
Yeah. I would like to talk more about safety, but I also want to ask some questions on more like advice for younger people. You know, if for yourself, what's one advice you give for your 20-year-old self?
Well, I'm feeling quite happy about like how my career evolved over the 15 years, and so I kind of followed what I really like, right? I'm a car person, like have always been as a teenager and so on, and I also went into computer games and later programming and these kind of things probably at the age around 10 or something, which was a long time ago. And so for me, autonomous vehicles is really the combination of both and has always been. So if I would have to give advice, it's really like, don't try to fit into something or don't try to fit something that exists, like, but think about what you enjoy and think about if there are ways to combine the things that you enjoy. So, for example, if you always wanted to be, I don't know, or if you're fascinated by space, then you should probably figure out like what exactly fascinates you, what is the maybe technology or what are the businesses that are operating there, and what notion of these businesses is really interesting to. For me, it was pretty straightforward. It was the engineering side, but maybe you're more interested in the business modeling part. But I feel like everyone has something that they really like. It could be a technical topic, it could be a completely different topic. And it's really spending time on figuring out like what are the topics that you're mostly interested in, how can I combine these and then make a career out of that, because at that point I don't think you will get bored or you will get this feeling where you say, oh, I have to work again. It's more like, oh cool, like I can actually combine the 2 or 3 things I really enjoy and today I'm going to do that specific problem, right? So that's definitely one of the advices. And the other thing is risk something. Right, like everyone today in today's world, or most people grow up in very stable environments. Right, there's access to education either way for most of kids, and so people are a little complacent and comfortable. So I think risking something basically meaning is don't go to this large corporation where you know you will have a secure job for the next 40 years, but maybe look into the startup space or try things out, like try if research is something that you're interested in, or maybe even try out like when you're young and explore the world a little bit, like what is happening in Asia, what is happening in the Middle East, what is happening in Europe and the US, to really see how different cultures are and what suits you best, like what you mostly enjoy. And for me and my family, it was Silicon Valley. Like I always wanted to come here after I heard about like the whole .com bubble, that development, and it took a while, but eventually we ended up here. And for us, it's just the right place to be. And so, yeah, explore things and explore the world, because there's certainly more than in your village that you grew up. Yeah.
Kind of job searching, and I also think I want to work in a startup as well. I think I could learn a lot working in a startup, and there's way more responsibility in working in a startup. Although some people might find it more risky, but I think it's something that I want to do as well. Yeah.
I mean, it helps to have kind of like a backup net, but always thinking about what's the worst thing that could happen to me, and if the worst thing is, I have to buy a plane ticket to get home to my parents because I can't afford food anymore, so be it, right? If that's the worst thing that happens to you, well, it's probably fine to risk something at this point and figure out what next. Taking those risks to me is I think worth it. Yeah, definitely.
I see.
And we count startups into this. Like I've worked for 3 startups now. 2 of them were okay-ish, but not like the big life-changing exit event or anything like that. So there's always a risk associated with that, but I think the rewards are much higher. The learning curve, the stuff you're allowed to do at a startup compared to a large company.
Thank you so much for the interview and sharing your wise words. I learned a lot from what you've experienced, and I think that you shared some really good insights about safety, especially, which is I think it's super important.
Thank you for your time as well. Good luck on finding out what you want to do.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too. Thank you. Take care. Bye.